New York City, October 1907. Before dawn, the sky is the color of ash, and the wind slices straight through wool coats. On Fifth Avenue, a line has already formed outside a grand marble building with columns and bronze doors, the Knickerbocker Trust. They're not here to admire it. Men in work jackets stamp their feet on the stone to keep the feeling in their toes. Women clutch worn handbags and paper passbooks like life preservers. No one really knows who started the rumor last night. They just know one thing. If those doors don't open, their money might be gone forever. Near the back of the line, a small tailor named Isaac pulls his coat tighter and checks his pocket for the third time. His entire savings sit, in theory, behind those doors. 15 years of hemming sleeves and letting out waistlines, a dowry for his daughter, a cushion against illness. In his mind, the number is carved in stone. In reality, it's ink on someone else's ledger. The man ahead of him mutters, "I heard they lost everything in some copper scheme out west." The woman behind him whispers, "My cousin said another trust shut its doors yesterday and never reopened." Isaac doesn't understand copper schemes. He understands rent due on the first. He looks up at the cold, still windows and feels deep in his stomach an animal fear. If this building falls, so does his life. Now flash, just for a moment, to a different room that same week. A dark-paneled library, shelves of leather-bound books, smoke curling up from a cigar in a cut-glass ashtray. At the center of the room sits an older man with a heavy nose and piercing eyes, flipping through sheets of paper while bankers wait in absolute silence. J.P. Morgan. On those papers are balance sheets, liabilities, lists of who owes what to whom. On his word, institutions will live or die. On his decisions, the markets may stabilize or collapse. He is not the president. He was never elected. And yet, on these nights, he might be the most powerful man in America. How did it come to this? How did a handful of risky bets and secret meetings in private clubs bring an entire nation to the edge of financial collapse and end up writing the rules of the modern system you still trust with your paycheck? Because if you think this is just a dusty story about some old panic, you're wrong. You have already seen its echoes. In 1929, in 2008, in every headline that uses the word contagion, when a bank you've never heard of suddenly matters more than your own job. If you want to understand why financial crises keep ambushing ordinary people while the system somehow survives, you have to start here. On that cold sidewalk, in that dark library, in a country that thought it was invincible. If you're the kind of person who doesn't want to be surprised the next time the headlines scream, "Panic," hit subscribe to Golden History USA now so the algorithm knows you're here for the long story, not just the crash montage. Now, let's rewind. Turn the clock back a few years. New York at the dawn of the 20th century is a city drunk on its own reflection. Electric lights burn through the night, turning streets into rivers of gold. Skyscrapers claw at the sky. Wall Street's tickers chatter like mechanical insects, spitting out fortunes in thin ribbons of paper. Mansions line Fifth Avenue, each one a monument to the idea that risk is virtue and wealth is proof of character. This is the Gilded Age. Not everyone is rich, but it certainly looks like everyone could be. Banks, railroads, steel, oil. Trusts, those vast financial conglomerates, have woven themselves through the economy like invisible steel cables. A small circle of men controls more money than some nations. They meet in back rooms, at yacht clubs, in private dining rooms with velvet drapes, betting on the future of entire industries while servants refill their glasses. For Isaac the tailor, none of that is visible. What he sees is simpler. Business is good. People are buying fine clothes. The newspapers talk about prosperity, and crucially, there's a new kind of institution on the rise. Trust companies. They look solid. Marble facades, classical columns, impressive names like Knickerbocker. They promise higher interest than the old-fashioned banks. Safe returns. No need to stuff cash in the mattress anymore. Would you have resisted that? You get paid. You deposit your money. You watch the number grow. The managers dress better than you, speak more confidently, seem to know secrets about the mysterious world of finance. The newspapers print their names with respect. Why question it? Up in his mansion on Madison Avenue, J.P. Morgan sees the same boom from a very different angle. He's not impressed by the glitter. He knows how fragile it is. Morgan is a paradox, a devout Episcopalian who collects art and dominates markets, a man who sees himself as a steward of stability while crushing competitors without blinking. He reads balance sheets like other men read novels. Where others see prosperity, he sees leverage. Where others see growth, he sees risk piled on risk. He also sees something else. The government is small, slow, and far away. There is no Federal Reserve. There is no central bank standing ready to flood the system with liquidity if something goes wrong. In a real crisis, the only people with the speed and money to act will be men like him. That thought makes him uneasy. It also makes him indispensable. As the years roll on, the financial web grows denser. New trusts rise, dangling higher returns in front of ordinary savers. The lines between speculation and safety blur. High up in the structure, speculators make daring bets on stocks, on railroads, on commodities like copper. Down below, those bets are invisible. All the little people see is the reassuring hall where they deposit their wages. You know how this story feels, don't you? Nah. In every boom, there's a moment when everything looks too good. Houses flip too fast. Stocks only go up. Neighbors brag at dinner about their returns. You feel a tiny sting of fear, buried under envy. Am I missing out? Early in 1907, that feeling hangs over New York like a faint smell of smoke no one wants to acknowledge. There are warning signs. A stock market wobble here, an overextended firm there. Articles buried deep inside the financial pages muttering about tight credit and nervousness. But the top of the story is still dominated by triumph. America is rich, growing, unstoppable. Then comes a man named F. Augustus Heinze. Heinze is a copper magnate with the kind of confidence you only get by winning too many risky bets in a row. He believes he can corner the copper market, control enough supply to force prices up, and crush anyone shorting the metal. If that sounds like arrogance, it is. If it sounds familiar, it should. Every era has its Heinzes, traders, CEOs, influencers convinced they can bend the market by sheer will. Heinz's plan is complex on paper, but simple in spirit. Borrow heavily, buy aggressively, squeeze anyone on the wrong side of the trade. For a while, it looks like it might work. The market moves. People murmur about his brilliance. Then reality pushes back. His opponents find ways around the squeeze. Prices don't behave the way he needs them to. The loans don't look as secure as they did on the optimistic projections. The corner fails. In another world, his downfall might be just another cautionary tale about a gambler who flew too close to the sun. In 1907 New York, it's something much worse. Because Heinze isn't just a lone player. He is entangled with banks, with trusts, with respectable institutions who lent him money or sat on the same boards, who quietly bet on his success. Reputational contagion moves faster than any ledger entry. As whispers spread that Heinz's operations are rotten, every institution with his name anywhere near it starts to stink. Knickerbocker Trust is one of them. It has grown fat on the boom years, handling money for thousands of small depositors like Isaac, and for bigger clients who enjoy its slightly higher returns. Its president, Charles Barney, has friends in all the right circles. Up until now, the association with bold, successful financiers has been an asset. Suddenly, it's a liability. Rumors start in the quietest way. A banker who knows a banker says, "I hear Knickerbocker is mixed up in that copper mess." A clerk mentions to a friend, "We had some large withdrawals today." Someone at a dinner party says, "My cousin moved his money out, just in case." Now put yourself back in that line. You are not reading balance sheets. You are hearing fragments. Did you hear? They say, "I can't afford to take the risk." You don't know whether it's true. You only know this. If you get spooked and pull your money, and the rumor turns out to be false, you've lost nothing. If you ignore it and the trust really is in trouble, you could lose everything. What would you do? If you walk away, you are trusting a system you don't understand, run by men who will never learn your name. If you stay, you are trusting your fear. A bank can survive bad loans for a surprisingly long time. It cannot survive all its customers turning up on the same morning to demand their money back. On that cold October day, fear wins. One depositor decides to withdraw just to be safe. Tellers process it. Someone in line sees the cash changing hands. Their own fear spikes. They withdraw too. The line grows, not shrinks. Passers-by see the crowd and assume the worst. The rumor, something's wrong at Knickerbocker, stops being a rumor. It becomes reality as soon as enough people act on it. Inside, clerks work as fast as they can, hands shaking, passing notes to managers. We're paying out more than we're taking in. Managers send panicked telegrams. The reserves, never built for this kind of onslaught, drain like water down a cracked pipe. Outside, Isaac watches the doors, heart pounding, an ugly thought forcing itself into his mind. What if there's nothing left when I get to the front? This is the anatomy of a bank run, not as an economic concept, but as a human chain reaction. One man's failed copper gamble, one institution tainted by association, one rumor, one line, and suddenly the great glittering world of Gilded Age finance looks less like a cathedral of prosperity and more like a crowded theater where someone has just shouted fire. In that moment, staring at the crumbling trust, one brutal truth becomes obvious. There is no one in Washington with the tools or the will to stop this quickly. No central bank, no playbook, no emergency lender. The government is a distant spectator, but there is someone with enough money, enough connections, and enough sheer force of personality to attempt a rescue. He is sitting in that dark library, flipping through papers, deciding who lives and who dies. And whether you find that comforting or terrifying is the beginning of the real story. In the library on Madison Avenue, the air is thick with cigar smoke and impatience. It's late, but J.P. Morgan keeps banker's hours that ignore the clock. Lamps cast yellow circles on stacks of papers, balance sheets, telegrams, hastily scribbled notes from trust companies on the brink. He doesn't need anyone to tell him what a run on Knickerbocker means. He's seen this movie before. Smaller, quieter versions of it. He knows how fast panic spreads when people realize their safe money is not safe at all. He also knows a brutal truth. There is no institution above him that can fix this. No Federal Reserve, no central authority that can simply decide, we will provide liquidity, we will be the backstop. The Treasury is cautious, slow, bound by politics. The president is far away. If someone is going to stop this, it will have to be him. So he sends for them. One by one, the city's most powerful bankers, trust company presidents, and financiers are summoned to his house. Some come out of respect, some out of fear, some because they know that if Morgan calls and you ignore it, your signature on any loan tomorrow is worth less. They file into the library like schoolboys to the headmaster's office. He doesn't bother with small talk. He points to the sheets on his desk. Here, he says, jabbing one thick finger at a column of numbers. Knickerbocker can't meet its obligations. If it fails, confidence in every trust will go. Then the banks, then the whole city. Some of the men shift uncomfortably, eyes darting around. In their hearts, they are already calculating, how exposed am I? Can I profit from a rival's collapse? Can I survive if I do nothing? Morgan sees it on their faces and feels a familiar contempt. He believes in capitalism, but he does not believe in chaos. He does not intend to let these men's fear destroy the house he helped build. He reminds them, calmly but with an edge, that if the system goes, they go with it. Gentlemen, he says, voice low, if we don't act, we'll all be standing outside our own banks tomorrow, watching lines form. There is a question hiding under his words. Are you prepared to put your money where your public speeches about confidence and stability are? Because that's the thing about panics. Everyone loves the system when it's pumping out profits. When it starts devouring them, suddenly the market will sort it out. Doesn't sound so wise. Outside, the lines are getting longer. At Knickerbocker, the scene has turned from a nervous queue into something closer to desperation. Someone pushes forward and bangs on the door. Another shouts that he has a sick child at home. He needs his money now. The tellers inside can hear every word. They are paying out as fast as they can. Bundles of cash shrink from tall stacks to thin sheaves. Runners carry messages upstairs. Reserves nearly exhausted. Imagine being one of those clerks. You joined a respectable institution. Marble floors, polished counters, the quiet dignity of other people's money. You thought you had a stable job, a future. Now you are looking into the eyes of people whose lives will be shattered if you have to say, "I'm sorry, there's nothing left." How long could you stand there before you feel like a thief, even if you've done nothing wrong? At a certain point, the numbers simply don't add up. The president of Knickerbocker knows it. He sends an urgent plea to Morgan. Support us. Signal to the market that we are sound. Give us the lifeline we need. Morgan studies their books. He doesn't like what he sees. Here is where the story twists into something uncomfortable. On the one hand, Morgan is perfectly positioned to act as a one-man central bank. He has the capital, the connections, the authority. On the other hand, he is not a public servant. He is not accountable to voters. His first loyalty is to the stability of the system as he defines it, and to the firms he considers worthy of saving. Knickerbocker, in his judgment, is not. He refuses to back them. In that instant, the trust's fate is sealed. Word gets out, indirectly at first. A whisper that Morgan won't touch Knickerbocker spreads like a stain. If the most powerful banker in America won't vouch for them, what does that tell people standing in line? The next day, Knickerbocker Trust closes its doors. Isaac never makes it to the front of the line. He stands there long enough to feel the shift in the crowd. A murmur, a raised voice, the first person trying the handle and finding it locked. His breath catches. Someone shouts, "They've shut it! They've shut us out!" Another person hits the door, hard, pain and fear spilling over into rage. In that moment, the theory of a panic turns into a personal catastrophe. Isaac's world shrinks to one brutal thought. Everything I have ever saved might be gone. He is not thinking about systemic risk or moral hazard. He is thinking about his daughter's dowry, his wife's medicine, the rent, the humiliation of telling his landlord he cannot pay. And as dozens of people like him stumble away from the doors, the effect ripples outward. If Knickerbocker can fall, any trust can fall. Rumors jump from street to street. Depositors begin to pull money from other institutions, some vulnerable, some perfectly sound. The problem is no longer a single failed copper corner. The problem is belief. Belief that your money is safe where you left it. Belief that the institutions with grand lobbies and official seals are more than just fragile piles of promises. Once that belief cracks, every piece of paper with your name on it begins to feel weightless. Back in the library, Morgan knows the game has changed. Saving one trust is no longer enough. This is no longer about Knickerbocker. It's about the entire financial heart of the country. If fear continues to spread, the stock exchange itself could shut down. Businesses far from New York will lose access to credit. Payrolls will be missed. Factories will go dark. You might be tempted to think, good, let the rich suffer. But the rich rarely starve first. It's the shop clerks, the dock workers, the tailors, the waiters, the people who never attended a single board meeting, who feel the hit in their bodies long before any titan has to sell a painting. Morgan understands that. He also understands something else. If he steps in and saves the system, he strengthens his own position even more. So he makes his move. He calls the heads of the city's biggest banks and trust companies back to his house. This time, he is not asking for their opinions. He is dictating terms. Men with fortunes of their own stand around his desk like nervous students. He has locked some of them in a room before, during an earlier crisis, and refused to let them leave until they sign an agreement to rescue a failing trust. The memory of that night hangs in the air. He lays out a stark choice. Either they pool money to support key institutions, inject confidence, and keep the stock exchange open, or they watch the entire edifice collapse and hope they can pick through the wreckage for scraps. Which would you choose if you were in that room? Pretend just for a moment that you're not struggling with rent or debt or bills, but that you control millions. Do you put it at risk to save the system and your competitors? Or do you secretly hope some of them die so you can inherit their place? Morgan doesn't give them much time to wrestle with their conscience. He goes man by man, pressing, persuading, threatening reputational ruin. He reminds them of their public duty, their private vulnerability, their shared dependence on a functioning market. At some point, he also invokes what he believes is a higher calling: stewardship. To him, this is not just business. It is a near-religious responsibility to keep the structure standing, even if some of the bricks fall. Outside, the chaos continues. Other banks now face their own lines. The stock exchange teeters. The city hums with rumors. Newspapers print alarming headlines one day and reassurances the next. People read them and feel their stomachs flip-flop between hope and dread. On one corner, a small crowd argues. One man insists this is all overblown hysteria, that the markets will correct. Another hisses that the money kings have been gambling with everyone's security and deserve to burn. Both of them are right in their own way. The system is built to survive. It is also built to externalize pain onto the people at the bottom. In the library, as evening deepens, the men finally break. They agree to create a rescue pool, to funnel funds toward endangered institutions, to keep the stock exchange from shutting its doors. They agree, not because they suddenly develop compassion, but because they understand they are next if they don't. They sign. Morgan has effectively done what a central bank does in a crisis: coordinate a response, act as lender of last resort, lend his credibility to calm the waters. Except he is not a central bank. He is one man. He decides which institutions are systemically important enough to save and which are not. He decides which executives will be quietly pushed out, which shareholders will be wiped, which firms will be fused together under terms he dictates. He is, for a brief and extraordinary moment, the unelected master of the American financial universe. Does that make you feel safer, or does it make your skin crawl? Because as headlines praise him for saving Wall Street, people like Isaac count their losses in silence. Their trust in the system, already fragile, is shattered. They do not remember the names of all the men in that library. They remember the locked doors, the panic, the sinking feeling in their own chest. And somewhere, beneath the praise and the relief, another feeling begins to stir among the public. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a betrayal. A system that promised security had been built on risk it never disclosed. A world that preached prosperity for all had quietly written rules, making sure that, in a crisis, the little people took the hit first. The panic will recede, markets will stabilize, life will go on, but the memory of those lines outside the banks and the knowledge that one man had to act as a private central bank to prevent catastrophe will leave a permanent question hanging in the air. How long can a modern nation pretend it doesn't need a real one? When the panic finally loosened its grip, it didn't feel like a victory parade. The headlines calmed down. The stock exchange stayed open. The carriages kept rolling down Fifth Avenue. In the library on Madison Avenue, the lamps were put out and the papers were filed away. But on the streets, in tenement apartments and small shops, people were taking inventory of their losses. Isaac, the tailor, never got all his money back. Maybe he recovered a fraction. Maybe he got nothing. Either way, the number carved in his mind, 15 years of careful saving, was now a ghost. His daughter's dowry shrank. Plans were postponed. Nights got longer, sleep more fragile. Multiply him by thousands. A baker unable to pay for flour on credit because his banker is suddenly tightening standards. A factory worker laid off because his employer's loans were called in. A widow who thought her husband's savings in a trust company were safer than cash, and now stares at a letter full of legal phrases that all boil down to one thing. You were at the wrong end of the table when the music stopped. Have you ever had that moment on a smaller scale? A job you thought was secure, gone. A pension you thought was guaranteed, cut. A safe investment, suddenly not so safe. You know the feeling in your stomach, the mix of anger and humiliation, the sense that while you were playing by the rules, someone else was quietly editing them. That's what 1907 felt like for a lot of Americans. Yes, the system had been saved. No, they were not the ones who felt saved. They watched as newspapers praised J.P. Morgan as a hero, the man who had stepped in when the government couldn't. They saw cartoonists draw him as a kind of benevolent Roman consul, holding back the tides of panic with his bare hands. And they asked themselves a simple, bitter question. If one private banker can save the system, what does that say about the system? Who was this machine really built for? Because if the game is designed so that profits are privatized in the boom and losses are socialized or dumped on the least powerful, in the bust, how long can you sell that as the American dream before people start calling it by a different name? Betrayal. That word began to hang in the air, even among people who couldn't quite articulate the mechanics of what had happened. They didn't need a PhD in economics to know that something about this arrangement was wrong. Wealthy men made reckless bets with borrowed money, the public's faith kept the wheel turning, and when it all came crashing down, the public got bruised while the biggest players walked away bigger than before. Sound familiar? The anger didn't vanish. It curdled into a slow-burning demand. Never again. And here is where the story pivots from catastrophe to blueprint. Behind the scenes, another set of men started meeting. Not in panic, but in planning. Politicians, bankers, economists. They studied 1907 not as an isolated oops, but as a structural failure. They asked themselves, how do we build something into the system that can do what Morgan did without being Morgan? Years of debate followed, investigations, reports, commissions. The most famous was the National Monetary Commission, headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich. They toured Europe, studied central banks there, and came back with a controversial idea. America needed its own central bank, a lender of last resort that could provide emergency credit, smooth out panics, and act as a kind of institutionalized version of J.P. Morgan's war room. The result, after political fights and compromises, was the Federal Reserve System, created in 1913. Think about that for a second. The line outside Knickerbocker Trust, the library filled with nervous bankers, the tailor clutching his empty passbook. All of that fed into the creation of an institution that still shapes your life every day, whether you notice it or not. When you hear about interest rates changing, when you read about the Fed raising or lowering them, when you see a headline about emergency lending facilities during a crisis, you are seeing the shadow of 1907. In theory, the Fed was meant to make sure panic would never again depend on the conscience of one man with a cigar. In practice, well, you've seen how that turned out. Jump forward with me. Black Thursday, 1929, bank failures in the early 1930s, savings and loan crises, and then, more recently, 2008. Different buildings, different suits, different jargon. But if you strip away the acronyms and the modern tech, the pattern feels unsettlingly familiar. Boom years where risk is masked as innovation. Ordinary people trusting that the institutions holding their money know what they're doing. A sudden shock, spreading fear. And then behind closed doors, emergency meetings where powerful people decide which firms live, which die, and how much pain the public can be asked to swallow in the name of stability. Every time politicians step up to a podium and assure you that the fundamentals are strong, that our system is sound, that we have learned the lessons of history. Have they? Or have they just learned how to speak more smoothly while pulling the same levers? When you heard phrases like too big to fail in 2008, you were hearing the spiritual descendant of J.P. Morgan's decision to save some institutions and let others fall. When you saw governments and central banks inject billions to prop up failing financial firms, you were watching the same dilemma play out in modern clothing. If we let them collapse, the shock will destroy innocent lives. If we save them, we reward the very behavior that caused the problem. And where are you in that equation? Usually right where Isaac was, somewhere at the bottom of the cascade, hoping the decisions made in rooms you'll never enter don't wipe out everything you've built. So what's the lesson? Is it that all banking is evil, all markets are rigged, and nothing can ever be trusted? The lesson is sharper than that. It's that financial systems are not neutral machines. They're built by people, run by people, and, crucially, tilted by people towards certain kinds of risk and certain kinds of protection. If you don't understand the history of that tilt, you end up walking into the casino thinking you're in a church. The Panic of 1907 isn't just a story about one crisis and one heroic banker. It's a warning flare frozen in time saying, look how close you came to losing everything, because you let a tiny group of men weld the entire system together without a real safety net, and then let one of them act as your emergency brake. It's no accident that after 1907 came the Fed, after the Great Depression came deposit insurance, after later crises came new regulations, new oversight, new watchdogs, and it's also no accident that, over time, those safeguards get chipped away, watered down, or outpaced by new forms of speculation. We build rules in the smoking ruins of the last disaster. Then, as the memory fades, someone finds a way to dance near the edge again. Where does that leave you? Right now, as you watch this, your money, the balance you see in your banking app, the retirement account, the savings you hope will still be there in 10 years, is sitting inside a system whose DNA was written in panics like 1907. So the question isn't just, what happened back then? The question is, what will happen the next time the music stops? Will the safety nets hold? Will the lender of last resort act fast enough? Will the people making the decisions think about you or about their peers, their bonuses, their political fortunes? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, will you realize you're living through a rhyme of 1907 while it's happening? Or only later, when the doors have already closed? If this story has done its job, you may feel a mix of emotions right now. Some anger, some unease, maybe even a strange, cold recognition. I've seen this pattern before. I just never knew its origin. That feeling, that click in your mind when you see the long arc behind the short headline, is the whole reason this channel exists. Golden History USA is not here to tell you to dump your bank, hoard gold, or worship some financial guru. It's here to do something far more subversive, to make sure that the next time you hear about a liquidity crisis, a trust deficit, a necessary bailout, you don't just shrug and hope for the best. You remember the tailor in the line. You remember the locked doors. You remember the library full of men deciding your fate without your consent. If you want more of that, more long-form breakdowns that take the myths you were fed in school and crack them open to show you the gears underneath, then don't just move on to the next video and hope the algorithm does you a favor. Tell it what you want. Hit subscribe to Golden History USA. Turn on the bell so these deep dives don't get buried under 10-second clips and outraged thumbnails. If this made you see your bank balance a little differently, hit like. Not because I need the dopamine, but because it tells the system people actually care about the history behind their money. And then share this with one person in your life who thinks old financial panics are boring trivia. Maybe it's the friend who plays the markets like a video game. Maybe it's the relative who says, the system always works out in the end. Maybe it's the younger sibling who only knows the Fed as a meme. Send it with a simple message. Watch this, then tell me if 1907 really feels over to you. Because the truth is, we are all still living in the house that panic built. The marble facades look different now. The ledgers are digital. The men in the library wear different brands of suits. But the fault lines are still there. And the more you understand about how they were carved, the harder it is for anyone, banker, politician, pundit, to tell you with a straight face that no one could have seen this coming when the next shock hits. History doesn't repeat, they say. It rhymes. 1907 was one verse. The only real question is whether you'll recognize the next one, or just wake up one morning to find yourself in a line, staring at a locked door, wondering how it happened again.